I'm going to explain the biggest mistake people make in portrait drawings. In general, with portraiture, there is an assumption that the things that matter the most are the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. But that's actually not true at all. This is what really matters in a portrait. A skull is pure structure. This is the key to your success. Look at the eyes, nose, and mouth here and how little they matter in terms of establishing a skull. The eyelashes, the pupils, the bottom part of the nose, and then also the lips. None of those things are on the skull. No eyelashes, no nose, and no lips. What that tells you is that those parts of the face are not the parts that give a head the mass and structure. What's difficult about portraits is that we do have parts on our face that are very soft and fleshy, like our cheek. But if you don't really make use of the skull in your portrait drawing, you're going to end up with a face that looks really blobby and soft. I mean, unless you're making a zombie, it's probably not the quality you want for your portrait drawing. The landmarks in the skull that really matter, especially in the beginning of a portrait drawing: eye sockets, nasal bone, the jawbone, the cheekbone, which is called the zygomatic arch. But what really trips people up in terms of trying to articulate those structures is that none of them are that tangible. This part is the cheekbone, but it's not something really specific that you can outline or hold like an apple. This edge of the cheekbone has a very definitive line, but then you can see where it ends is not so clear cut. That's one of the reasons I think oftentimes people are very hesitant to put in those structures, because it's just not really obvious. Now compare that very vague cheekbone. Look at how easy it is to spot the pupil. That's something where you can say, yes, I nailed the pupil. But cheekbones are not like that. You can see the same thing happening on this side. The contrast is not that dramatic here. You've got some shadows underneath the eye. You can see the cheekbone here. It's not like you can draw the outline for the cheekbone. It's really a bunch of smudgy areas. You've got the shadow underneath the eye, the highlight over here. But as far as really trying to know that's where the cheekbone is, you don't get that type of definitive answer the way you do with something like the lips. That's what's really difficult about these bony landmarks, is they're not super obvious. Look at this portrait and you'll see that the eyes are quite small. We just have a little bit of indication here on the nose, and you can see because the lips are buried inside the beard. Think about the percentage of space that the eyes, nose, and mouth are taking up in this portrait. It's a very small quantity. This is where really simple anatomical knowledge is going to help you in a portrait drawing. You have to know, what am I looking for? You have to be able to look at the cheek area in a portrait and you have to tell yourself, okay, that area, I should be looking for the cheekbone. There's a big difference between looking at something and drawing it and identifying something and drawing it. You'll find that if you do a really excellent job of setting up these bony landmarks, the other stuff you do in the portrait, it almost doesn't matter. A lot of getting those structures to be really prominent is to make sure you really emphasize them. So here we have the nasal bone. This is all cartilage down here at the bottom. This is where the bony area is on the nose. And you can see it's the part of the portrait that has really strong contrast. I'm trying to really get that area to pop and to make it look more rigid. Same thing here. I'm trying to really pull out that cheekbone, and then down here at the bottom you can see the chin is also quite pronounced because I want to get that jawbone in there. Here's where the drawing goes a little haywire. There's actually no really definitive lines. And if I just look at the spot without any of the facial features, it's a total blobby mess. And so that's where the nasal bone and also the jawbone, those bring you back to earth. That makes the portrait able to stand up. If you can get a skull or two, it is so important to be able to literally see and touch the structures. But the thing is, there's something even better than having a skull. That is making a clay skull. This was an assignment that I was given in art school my freshman year. It profoundly changed my perception of the skull. It's one thing to have a skull and observe it, but it's another thing when you can sculpt a skull and you have to look at the clay and you have to put your fingers inside those eye sockets. You will never underestimate the depth of an eye socket once you've actually had to construct it in a sculpture. If you have to sculpt an actual jawbone, you will understand the rigidity and structure of that jawbone. This is easy to observe, but the whole thing about portrait drawing that I don't think is that obvious is it is actually extremely similar to sculpture in that you are building and constructing a skull. Nothing else can happen. Think about the lips. The lips are very soft and full of tissue. Your nose is all cartilage. Your eyes are these squishy little things. This is where it all happens. Really want to be an overachiever? Do a portrait sculpture. Not only did I have to actually build this rigid nasal bone, but I had to take some clay and create the mass of the nose. Once you're actually holding clay, you're holding literal form. Once you've had to touch the various components and model them, you'll have a completely different understanding of portrait drawing. In my opinion, portrait drawing and portrait sculpture would be so much more effective if they were taught together. So often they're totally separate, but to me, the connection between the two makes so much more sense. And I really think that if everybody had the chance to make a sculpture, that they would look at their portrait drawing process very differently. Now, I know that not everybody is going to have the time or the ability to make a clay skull, but you know what you can do? Make little faces. I had so much fun making these when I was in graduate school, and they're such a nice, easy way on a small scale to have a sculptural experience. The thing that's tricky about portrait drawing is that it really is a two-dimensional illusion. You're trying to get something that you're looking at as being three-dimensional, and you're trying to create the illusion of that volume on a two-dimensional surface. Even in a drawing like this, which is really out of control. I never had a chance to finish it, but one where the forms are not intended to be super defined, you can see what a big deal these eye sockets are. If you look at a lot of Kathy Kollowitz's portraits, you'll actually notice that most of the time she's drawing eye sockets. It's actually not that common that you'll look at one of her drawings and see a really well-defined eyelid. I like to think about eye sockets, they're like these gigantic craters. You have to build the Grand Canyon before you can actually get that squishy wet eyeball in there. You'll notice what really matters in the end is what you have drawn around the facial feature. The only thing that's really defining the lips here is this very dark line, but then look at all the supporting structures. You have the skin at the top, you have the mass of the chin. Buddy, don't walk on that, buddy. Look at what's surrounding those structures, because we can look at the nose and say, okay, there's some nostrils there, but you know what really matters more is these gigantic creases. Now, if we didn't have those creases, the nose would probably look like it was just floating in space. That's another reason that you have to build the forms around. Sometimes I look at portraits and the mouths almost look like somebody just stuck them on top of the surface of the head. And the key to a lot of these facial features really working is you want them to look like they're really immersed in the form of the head. Typically, if you ignore all of the stuff around the mouth, that's what you're going to end up with. A lot of doing a portrait drawing is resisting the temptation to go in right immediately into the eyes, nose, and mouth. Most of this face is all structure. Look at this is a large area of the cheekbone. The forehead is quite big. Now look at how tiny those eyes are. And so oftentimes I'll see people working on portrait drawings and they're fussing like crazy over eyelids, but there's no feeling of that eye socket that the eye is sitting within. And I know people worry a lot about, oh, it doesn't look like the person. It's like you only spent 10 minutes on it. You cannot think about likeness. That is the kiss of death. The second you start worrying, oh, does it look like that person? You're not thinking about drawing anymore. You're bothering yourself and getting stressed out about the product where you're not even close to getting that. You have to let your portrait be a big blob for a long time, not focus on the eyes, nose, and mouth. Those are two things that most people really don't want to do. We really want the confidence that, okay, we got the eyes, nose, and mouth set. Now I can work on the other things. That's not true at all. Because remember, it's all about structure. To learn structure, spend some quality time with your skull. They'll tell you everything.